Hello everyone, my name's Lou Garrick. I'm a geologist and the disability lead here at SYSTRA, and today we're here to talk about ADHD. So we've got three special speakers. So we've got Benedict Andrews, James Edwards and Daniel Dekker. They're going to talk about their lives with ADHD, potential challenges that they face, benefits of having ADHD within the workplace, and any other things that they think we might find interesting. So would you like to introduce yourselves, please?
Good afternoon. I'm Benedict Andrews. I'm a project analyst within the project management team of SYSTRA.
Hi, my name's James Edwards. I'm a modeller for the early team.
Good afternoon. My name's Daniel Dekker, and I work as a transport planning consultant within SYSTRA.
Thank you very much. So we're all based all over the UK and Ireland, so it's great for us all to come together today. So initially, I'd like to propose the question, what is ADHD? I think a lot of people have a preconception of what it is, but it'd be really interesting to get your thoughts on ADHD.
At the crux of it, ADHD is a neurological issue where your brain can't regulate or take in the correct amount of dopamine.
To me, as I found out, I diagnosed with it as an adult, and I always thought there was just hyperactive ADHD, but as I looked more into it and I got my own diagnosis, there is actually three types of ADHD. The hyperactive style that we all know. There is actually an inattentive, which is more about keeping your own space, like in your own personal bubble. And there's a combination of both. I personally have a combination, but more leaning on the inattentive side of things. And for the listeners out there as well, it might be interesting to know that typically girls are more likely to have inattentive ADHD and are less likely to show disruptive symptoms. These symptoms often make ADHD diagnosis more obvious. The following symptoms are practically likely to affect girls. Inattentive people with ADHD may find it hard to concentrate and can often mask how they feel to better fit in their environment.
That's great, James. Thank you.
Yeah, I think for me, I've always thought ADHD was a bit of a misnomer because ADHD is attention deficit hyperactive disorder, and I've always thought that, yeah, as I said, it's a bit of a misnomer because it implies that there's a deficit in attention, but that's not true. People who have ADHD have plenty of attention, which is why they often have have a lot of special interests and hobbies that they know everything about. The problem is not so much that there's a deficit in attention, it's that if you find it hard to direct it and control it in a way, and it is because of what Benedict just said. It's that lack of regulation in dopamine, where you're constantly searching for the next dopamine rush.
So going off of what Daniel said, it's not a lack of attention, it's a lack of being able to regulate that attention and direct that attention towards specific goals or specific targets. That hunt for dopamine makes it so that your brain will take the easiest path to get it, which means that whilst you may have a task and you know you need to do that task, you're going to get the same amount of dopamine from doing something very, very simple and very, very easy as you would for doing something very, very challenging, which then makes it incredibly difficult to pay attention to something that you're not directly interested in or that's not directly engaging you.
Yeah, not directly stimulating.
You're hunting for the dopamine, so you need that hit to be able to do things. If that's the case, how do you cope with that at work? So how does ADHD affect you in the workplace? And what are your main challenges? You said you've got to hunt for that dopamine. So what do you do at work to combat that?
That's quite a complicated answer for me, at least. As I was diagnosed as an adult, so as far as I'm aware, this is me. So I've always been like this. So it's a bit of self-discovery, finding out what is me and what might be actual ADHD symptoms. And if you have the correct environment, ADHD can be instantly a superpower. Like lists, knowing deadlines, background music to drown out overwhelming noises in the office space, having something to fidget with. And a lot of people might find that quite rude, especially in meetings. But when you have something to fidget, you can ground yourself and it can help you concentrate in the hard conversations. It can help you concentrate and stop getting overwhelmed in those meetings. For example, I've got a hair bubble wrapped around my finger right now that I'm just fiddling with, which helps me concentrate as we go through this podcast. And that's what I would call a positive fidget. If you don't have a positive fidget, it can also come out as a negative fidget, as I like to call it, where you can be restless, shaking your leg, humming, singing, and tapping, which can also disrupt and often upset or annoy people in your environment in the office.
If you've got something to take your focus off in your meetings, so like if people use fidget spinners and things like that, so you said you've got a hair bubble around your finger. Do you have things that you use?
So ADHD is not always a negative, and the thing that I use is I've got a chain at home which I spin around, and that helps me put that excess into something. But ADHD is not always a negative in the workplace. It can be used as a positive with things like hyperfocus. You get better at problem solving because you see the world from a different perspective. And if you're actually engaged in what you're doing and it's challenging you, then you can succeed to a point that is unrecognizable than if you're not.
Oh, absolutely. So if you manage to overcome the challenges, it's fantastic. But so yeah, it's definitely about that. Yeah, the fidgeting, the sort of the lack of being able to concentrate, being distracted by noises. Sometimes some people, not me particularly, but some people seem to really struggle with light as well. I can get very distracted by other people having calls and meetings in open plan offices. And just in general, sort of managing your time, remaining organized, sort of keeping notes and actually sort of keeping them in a place where you can find them again. So it's all of those kind of classic things, and things like medication and a fidget spinner and just creating the right kind of environment can really help a lot in that sense. But I also think it's about that executive dysfunction where you sort of I would say it's you're walking a constant line between either being understimulated, where something is not engaging enough for you for whatever reason, or you can also really quickly become overstimulated, where it's if you are just so engaged by things but they can become too big, and that's where you get overwhelmed. So you're constantly trying to walk that tightrope and make that work. But there's a lot of help out there, but I would say that one is particularly tricky to balance and to master.
Are you trying to manage your over and your under stimulation without getting too overwhelmed? So that sounds like a challenge, but it sounds like you're all managing it with your own different ways.
Something that's also quite handy with ADHD is not just hyperfocus, but hyperfixation, which is why a lot of people with ADHD will have 110 hobbies. They'll learn everything there is to know about that one hobby, and then the dopamine will run out and they'll move to the next. If you learn how to control this, for example, being passionate about your job. I love the job that I do. I love being a CAD technician. If you can mold that towards your job, then the hyper focus is there. You're getting dopamine from your job, and it helps you just be somewhat of a perfectionist. You obviously need to lean back, not put every nut, bolt, and rivet in every single design piece, because that might not be the standard for the project you're working on. But if you can get the hyperfixation in place on what you're doing and become passionate about it, then that is a superpower of its own, I think.
It sounds to me like you've moved into the realm of positives in the workplace there, James. So you've talked about perfectionism, and if you can learn how to control your ADHD and you can find the things that you're passionate about, then it sounds to me like they're the ways that you manage your ADHD, but it's having the support of the team around you, I think, and your line manager. Has anyone got any experiences where they've had some really positive?
I think just following up on from James's point, there's a quote from ADHD expert Dr. Russell Barkley saying if they're, who are the people with ADHD, doing something they enjoy or find psychologically rewarding, they'll tend to persist in this behaviour after others would normally move on to other things. And that is completely backing up what James has just said, where when you're engaged in something and engaged in a goal, you will persist in that and persist to face that challenge a lot longer than people without would, because you get that hyperfixation, you get that hyperfocus, you get almost this obsession with fixing that problem until you fixed it.
And that's a really good point, because in the environment we're working in, we're all about problem solving.
It does present itself in work and in problem solving, where you'll see people having a very, very specific engineering challenge, for instance. And some people may give up after a certain time or go seek a different perspective, and you'll see other people continuing to challenge against it long after. And whilst that can be both positive and a negative, it shows one of those aspects of a different neurological function.
Yeah, I completely agree with Benedict and James there. Sort of if you manage to harness that power, essentially that's not just a way to manage your ADHD, it's almost a way of unleashing your ADHD. So all of a sudden what was a challenge all of a sudden becomes a superpower when you manage to create that environment for yourself where you go, okay, I've got this project now, it's engaging, it's sort of at a level that I can tackle. It isn't too complex that it becomes overwhelming, but it's exactly that right level of stimulation, and all of a sudden you can absolutely fly. And that's when that hyper fixation and that ability to keep going at things and look at things from new perspectives until you crack the puzzle turns from a disability into a superpower.
Love that, Daniel. You just said about unleashing your ADHD and cracking a puzzle. Sounds like you really understand your ADHD really well.
It's still a battle every day.
Yeah, I suppose you're still learning and learning from people, and especially different experiences. You're exposed to different environments, and it's a challenge. So, James,
following on to your previous question, Lou, about how my team dealt with my ADHD, really positively, I must admit. When I got diagnosed, I went straight to my line manager and told him, and got me into a conversation with HR and asked what can we do to help you better in this environment while you're going on through this discovery. The answer was no idea, because I'm still learning myself. But I sat down and really looked into and researched the positives and the negatives, why I might be acting in certain ways on certain days, and basically a cheat sheet of knowing me, and sent that to my line manager, which he read and took on board. And I also sent it to the people that I work directly within the project, within the team. And I found that my line manager went away and even did his own research on ADHD to better understand it and better how to mold work life to better suit me. And if you remember, a little while ago, we had a lunchtime talk about autism and ADHD, and it was such a warm feeling to see in the attendance list so many of my team in that conference call, just to learn more about it and how to better work with me going forward.
Brilliant. So yeah, I remember it was a podcast last year, or it was a video call that we had a special guest come in. It was amazing to see so many people in the call, and we had a really good engagement from that as well. And since then, people are starting to talk about neurodiversity and neurodivergence, and I think we're all on a learning journey together. It's just great that we can talk about this today, that we can share this with our team and with the business and with the wider audience. And I just think you've just got so much that you can teach people. So we just really need to listen to what you've got to say. And like you said, James, having a line manager, having a team around you that are willing to support you and learn from you. And you've said it's a journey of discovery for you as well. So we're all, like we said, we're all on this journey together. So now we know a little bit more about ADHD and your experiences. We know it can bring so many positives, but also challenges to the workplace. Have you got anything else that you'd like to add or you'd like to share?
I thought that what James was just talking about was really positive about what he said, but engaging with your line manager, because I think if we try to get a conversation going, that is how we can get most out of people who have a neurodivergent condition, if it is ADHD or something else, because people with ADHD have a lot to offer, and it's it's not sort of the naughty boys in the back of the classroom. It's not sort of the hyperactive kids. It's of these it's of neurodivergent people have a really different perspective and a lot of creative energy that they can unleash if you want to, but you have to kind of get that conversation going, and you have to kind of think about how can we create the best environment to get everything to get the most out of everyone. So I think that type of conversation that James had with his line manager, that is, I think, sort of the route forward to create more progress.
I completely agree, Daniel, and raising awareness like this is definitely the best action to go forward to. But a topic I would like to mention is that what I found out is that typically people with ADHD can have other aspects towards that. Like, I was diagnosed as a child with dyslexia first, and as my dad would always say, stop fighting gravity, because I was a very clumsy child. I learned that I also had dyspraxia. And as I learned as I was growing up, when you tend to have dyslexia, you can also have dyspraxia and ADHD, almost like a triangle. They all come together in some shape, way, or form. And some of the negatives I'd like to touch on is like when you work too hard, too long, too stressed, you can deal with a burnout. And this can lead to lowering your immune system, depression, and all sorts, or ADHD paralysis, because people with ADHD take in so much information so quickly that it can just overwhelm the brain. So when you come down to sitting down on an evening, your body just switches off. Your mind's still racing, but your body just can't move your body. And obviously you can go to the toilet, but then you just go back to sitting down. It's almost like being in a prison of your own body. And that's definitely something nice to bring forward, some of the challenges of ADHD.
Ultimately, it comes down to talking about it, talking about the issues, talking about the challenges, but also how to face them. So I know one of the major issues I face is with instructions, if there's more than one or two, that I'm going to completely forget them. It's not because I'm not paying attention, it's just my mind's so full of other stimulus that memorizing a valid list of instructions is incredibly challenging. So one of the things that a lot of people that I work with have started to do is when they give me a lot of instructions, I'll send them off in writing. And that way I have something to refer back to. Or they understand that if we're having a discussion, more than likely I'm going to be taking notes. And that's so that when I go off and do the work that I need to do, I've got that thing to go back to that I know, and I'm not just working off of my memory.
Yeah, and it's often enough to relatively sort of simple things like that, but it's finding those sort of solutions about, yes, if I can't memorize it, so sorry, I'm just going to jot everything down. It's also about because you find it hard to start tasks, to get sort of that dopamine rush going, you tend to need a deadline to get something done. So I've started, and it's a work in progress, but I've started to, every time someone asks me to do something, I try to remember, like, to ask them very specifically, when do you need this done by? Because if there's a deadline on there, then I am way more likely to get everything together and actually get to it and do it on time and do it well, rather than if it is a sort of open-ended kind of situation. And those type of simple tricks can really, really help to get the best sort of out of neurodivergent people.
That's great. So you need a deadline to get that dopamine hit. What happens if you don't have that deadline, Daniel?
It's just a lot harder to get to it, and a lot of other things that do have a deadline will keep taking priority over the other thing, unless it is something that you find incredibly stimulating in the first place, in which case there's no issue usually. But it is for those type of things that you find it a little bit harder or can be more overwhelming, that you tend to need a deadline. Otherwise, there's always something higher up the list.
Ultimately, not having that deadline leaves that task open-ended. It means there's no accountability for when that task is meant to be finished, and it will just keep falling down the list of priorities whilst new things come in that have a deadline. So giving that deadline makes it a hell of a lot easier to not only finish it, but start it. And then on top of that, breaking down those major tasks into small wins. Now, as I said earlier, our brains don't comprehend the fact that making your bed and learning a new skill will do the exact same dopamine hit. So to us, it's the same win. So breaking those major tasks that by themselves are overwhelming into those smaller tasks and getting those small wins and getting those small dopamine hits and those building blocks is vital to succeeding.
It sounds like deadlines are really important, breaking down the tasks into little chunk-sized, bite-sized pieces. So if your team know that, so when you set a task initially, if they set that up from the start of a project, so break it down, little pieces at once, have milestones that you need to hit, rather than say you've got 2 weeks through a task, maybe have interim meetings as well. Do you think those types of things help?
I mean, those interim meetings,
yeah,
when you're doing a task, are vital to ensure that you are on the right road. If it's a simple task, then it's no problem. If it's a significant piece of work that you're doing, you want to make sure that you're on the right road. You want to make sure that you're devoting yourself in the right direction for it. So having those meetings with maybe your line manager or who is actually responsible for that piece of work ultimately is vital.
I suppose it's a fine line between having those meetings and feeling micromanaged as well.
The point I would like to add on to that is meetings that are booked in advance. And this is something that we don't realise we're doing. We don't realise we've done it until it's happened. And that is ADHD interruption rage. If we are hyper-focused and we're mining and we're getting the dopamine hit and we're getting the job at hand, and sometimes when people just come up to you and go, oh, well, do work on this instead, or oh, do that, and don't get me wrong, sometimes that's just how work life is. That sometimes happens, and that's absolutely fine. But what's also handy for people to know is when we turn around and get snappy or we're in a mood because of it, it just sometimes it happens. And for ADHD, recognizing when that's happened and realizing, actually, no, this is a part of life. Calm down, carry on with it. I think it's an important topic just to touch on.
James, did you just say mining?
Sorry, dopamine mining. I like
What's
to call
that?
it. I call it dopamine mining is when I'm searching for dopamine. So, for example, you've got a playlist that you've created yourself and you'll end up skipping about 500 songs to find that one song you've got emotional attachment to. And then you listen to that song on repeat for about 5 hours because it reduces stress and it gives you a dopamine every time you listen to it. So I like to call it dopamine mining.
Ultimately, making ADHD work, making yourself functional with them is about following that dopamine. It's about making sure that your body is getting the correct amount. And whether that comes through dopamine mining, as James has just mentioned, breaking a task down to small wins, actually understanding what's going on, hyper-focus, hyper-fixation, getting that dopamine and making sure that you're getting the right amount is how you make this successful.
A really good little summary there, Benedict.
It really is. It's actually kind of mind-boggling about how it controls so many aspects of your life, because it influences the way that you deal with, your ability to focus, your ability to stay organized. It's something about how you start tasks, but it tells you a lot. Having ADHD tells you a lot about your sort of emotional responses to things, the way that you deal with leadership, feedback. So I think is all incredibly influenced by having ADHD. As a person with ADHD, from a very early age, you have always felt different to everyone else. I think almost without exception. Even if you know that you have ADHD, you will still have felt incredibly different to everyone else. And as a result, you can be very perfectionist, but also feel incredibly rejected very quickly. So, for example, when you get feedback, and whereas some neurotypical people might just perceive that as, okay, so this is just a number of things that I need to change, to some people with ADHD, it can really feel like a knife has been put right in your chest. That's how hard feedback can feel as rejection.
I mean, to follow on from that point,
Yeah.
Growing up with ADHD, especially when you're diagnosed later on in life, you don't know why you're different. You don't really understand it. It doesn't present itself like a physical disability or a visible one. You don't know. To you, this is how everyone else sees. It's how everyone else does. So you're so often going to get the feedback of, oh, if only they could pay a bit more attention in class. Or, oh, they're just a loud kid at the back. And we're not all, as Daniel said earlier, we're not all the naughty kids at the back of the classroom. It's just unfortunate that so many people with ADHD are kind of slipping through the cracks because they don't know how to harness it, or because it's not recognised at a young enough age.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Benedict. So I just think that if we can all talk and share our experiences, we can learn so much from you all. So today I've really loved hearing all about ADHD and how it impacts your life. I know we've only touched on the subject a little bit, but I think there's so much more that we can learn from you all. We need to keep having these conversations. We need to keep the conversations going, not only to raise awareness, but to challenge misconceptions and to learn how we can get the best from you all, and also that will get the best from the team, from the business. We can really support each other to do that, so you can thrive at work and in life. So thank you very much for today and for sharing your experiences. It's been great. I've really loved and enjoyed hearing your experiences and your stories. So thanks. Take care.